Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. Before we get into the content, I want to give a very huge thank you to everyone who has donated to my GoFundMe. And for those who don't know, my home province of Nova Scotia experienced a terrible tragedy this past weekend, which caused the death of 22 individuals as of today. That's the current count. I won't get into too many details because YouTube is flagging any video where I talk about this topic, including unfortunately the fundraiser video, but we have managed to raise over $15,000 that will go directly to the families of the victims. If you guys want to find more information, I'll link my past video and also the GoFundMe down in the description. However, I did think personally that it was time to get back into content today. I took a few days off to kind of get back in the mood. So I figured today we talk about one of my personal favorite things, large ships in the Star Wars universe. So, Super Star Destroyers are really questionable spaceships in a lot of ways. They are not very practical, they're large to the point of near absurdity, they can't be moved easily across the galaxy, they need hundreds of thousands of people to run the ship, and just generally they'd be not only nearly impossible to man, but also build unless you're a very highly militarized faction in the galaxy. And unsurprisingly, the only faction which was regularly pumping out dreadnoughts was the Galactic Empire. Sure, the New Republic did have the Viscount class and several other very large vessels, but by my estimation, the Empire throughout its life created around 50 SSDs, way more than any other faction in Star Wars history. And it's this fact that really leads to the Super Star Destroyer being, for a while, the most important ship class in the entire galaxy. Yes, Super Star Destroyers were incredibly wasteful and inefficient. They were incredibly blunt tools of war, and generally most factions would not create Super Star Destroyers unless they had another Super Star Destroyer to attempt to kill. However, with all that blunt force came a lot of pure power. After the Battle of Endor in Star Wars Legends, the Empire fractured in 1,000 different pieces, with various Moffs, Admirals, Grand Admirals, Imperial Advisors, Dark Jedi, and others, basically making their own mini little empires in a corner of the galaxy. These were generally called the Warlords, and a good example of that would be Warlord Zinj, or someone like Artus Kane, or arguably even Thrawn, or the quasi-legitimate Izani Isard. And what all of these mini factions were dealing with was the fact that they were trying to assert some claims of Imperial legitimacy, and one way they did do that was through the possession of a Super Star Destroyer. Gargantuan ships, like say an Executor class, are basically a symbol of the Empire, so if a warlord had one of those in their possession, it really did lend legitimacy to their cost, and this is especially because after Endor, no one had the production capacity to build more Super Star Destroyers. And while, as I mentioned, the New Republic would build some large ships of their own, after the Battle of Endor, the supply of Super Star Destroyers was forever limited, with new ships not possibly entering the supply. No shipyards were pumping out SSDs. The only way more could be found is if one was hidden in a supply cache or discovered in a far-off part of space, with, I guess, the exception of the Dark Empire, but that's not what we're really talking about today. However, obviously these ships were a lot more than just a status symbol. They were often the key military asset which held together these specific warlord factions. I would argue that Zinj's flagship, the Iron Fist, is almost as well known as he was. It alone made him one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy, it gave him bargaining power with other Imperial warlord groups and the New Republic, and it allowed him to assert himself and protect large swaths of territory. And you have to remember, Warlord Zinj wasn't just fighting the New Republic, he was also fighting the various remnants of the Empire, trying to carve out more and more space for his new faction. Unsurprisingly then, when Zinj was finally defeated by a combined Hapan New Republic fleet, he was in the bridge of his Super Star Destroyer. Another good example of that is Artus Kane and his Super Star Destroyer, the Reaper. Now Kane was far less expansionist than Warlord Zinj, so his large ship basically allowed him to protect the area that he did have. Other Warlord dreadnoughts include, for example, the Guardian, and probably the second most famous executor in Star Wars Legends, the Lusankya. The latter ship, the Lusankya, was used especially by Azani Isard after she was forced to flee Coruscant, and again, basically served as a sort of mobile capital. And that's another thing, it's something we see in the Rogue Squadron books. Really, a squadron or two of X-Wings and Y-Wings can take down, or at least seriously injure, a regular Star Destroyer. So even if you have many of them, if that's what your fleet is made up of, your flagship ultimately is vulnerable to Rebel strikes. However, if you do have a Super Star Destroyer, it provides you just an extra layer of security, and as we see not only with the New Republic's actions against the Lusankya, but also the Iron Fist, an extremely high level of planning is required to take down a vessel of that magnitude. Even if you find the ship, an incredible amount of resources will be needed, and you'll have to specifically exploit the numerous weaknesses of ships of that size. However, even after the Warlord era, the Super Star Destroyer remained an important symbol of Imperial legitimacy, and also of power. Arguably, the Warlord era was ended when Natasi Dala took control of a large portion of the various Imperial remnant groups, and her command ended when her Super Star Destroyer, the Nighthammer, was destroyed in the Battle of Yavin. As control of the Imperial remnant moved to Pelion, they continued to build their forces and define their naval strategy, including their offensive thrusts against the New Republic based on what dreadnoughts were available. On that note, the discovery of two lost Star Destroyers, the Megador and the Dominion, served to embolden the remnant's Moff Council, which led to the Arinda campaign. Then we saw the New Republic sort of realize how important these large ships continued to be despite their much more well-organized navy, and those thoughts were echoed by the subsequent Black Fleet crisis, which saw more lost Imperial dreadnoughts enter service. But going back to the Empire, the loss of the Reaper, a Super Star Destroyer which had been the command ship first of Artus Kane as mentioned, then later Pelion, was one of the major factors that led to the Imperial remnant moving from outside the deep core into the outer rim, and sort of accepting a spot as the second most dominant force, or perhaps third, in the galaxy. So after that we get peace between the New Republic and the Empire, then of course the Yuuzhan Vong invade. Not going to go into this really, but I will just say that very large ships were often used to anchor key planets. For example, the Mon Calamari shipyards were protected by several dreadnoughts. So I guess the general point of this video is that Super Star Destroyers continued to be very important, despite not being well designed, because of simply how powerful they were. Even though the Super Star Destroyer is an extremely blunt tool, it represents several fleets worth of firepower into a single ship, and that could not be ignored. It also represented for a long time a legitimate connection to the Empire. Most people who had Super Star Destroyers were gifted their command by Palpatine, as was the case with Artus Kane or Warlord Zinj. So it's important not only because they had a symbol of old Imperial might in their hands, but also that they were respected by the Emperor, and of course everyone was attempting to replace Palpatine. Then we have the early years where a Super Star Destroyer would literally be the most important piece from most of these Warlord defense fleets. But that's all I have for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again to everyone who donated. Of course, there will be a link to the GoFundMe down in the description. So we've got an interesting question today from Lynn Green, who asks, why was the Galactic Alliance circa 40 ABY building a new class of Imperial Star Destroyers instead of designs not associated with the Empire? So this is an interesting one. Basically, and I did a video on this, the Galactic Alliance, which was the successor state to the New Republic, sort of made a new class of Imperial Star Destroyers. It's not exactly clear, but these may very well be refitted Imperial 2s, and essentially they had various upgrades, including better weapons usually, and most of them had internal interdiction generators without the usual bulbs that you would see on an ordinary Star Destroyer. There were various sort of Imperial 2 refits, or Imperial 3s, whatever you want to call them. One would be the Anakin Solo, there was the Elegos Akla, there was the Mon Mothma, and I think, Lynn, you really pointed out what they were going for in those books. Han Solo was really offended when his dead child's name, Anakin Solo, was being used as a Star Destroyer. It's sort of meant to indicate that the Galactic Alliance is becoming quite imperial, and that was the issue Corellia had, and part of the reason why the Second Galactic Civil War happened. From a practical standpoint, if they are just refits, there's the fact that the GA at this point would have probably had hundreds, if not thousands of Star Destroyers under their command. Very interesting question though. I enjoy talking about the Legacy era we haven't got to in a while, so thank you very much, Lynn. If you guys have a question you'd like me to answer, leave it down below with the hashtag AskEck. Till next time guys, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.